Welcome to Pleasureology Island. I'm Free Thought Steve. Welcome to the happiness revolution. I'm a happiness revolutionary. I already told you I was a happiness radical. I'm a happiness revolutionary. I would like to see society transformed so that the number one priority in society, the way that society was organized, is so that everybody, all of us, are as happy as we can possibly be. That should be the principle around which society is organized. And everything else should be organized to be a means to that end of all of us being as happy as possible, as much of the time as possible, and that the happiness of every single one of us is what really counts. Now, the happiness revolution obviously would have to be a totally peaceful, gentle, slow revolution. Not a fast, violent revolution, because those always have bad after effects. But a slow, gentle revolution that occurs because all of us want society to be transformed and reorganized so that we're all cooperating for each other's happiness, and that we organize society with that as our primary goal. But that revolution is going to take, who knows, centuries. It may never come. I may just be indulging in utopian thinking, but that's one of the things I enjoy doing most, is indulging in utopian thinking, thinking about how society could be if it were a truly good society, because that's what utopia means, is a good or beautiful society, a good or beautiful place to live. And that's what the psychedelic counterculture, we had a lot of utopian visions back in the late 60s and early 70s. And of course, those visions were just visions, and there was no way they were going to be translated into realities in a society that is organized and designed so that all of us are working to make money for somebody else. And those folks who are on the top there, who get all the money made for them, unfortunately, they're not even happy. You know, they act like they're happy, but they don't know how to be happy. And the rest of us, well, society's not going to make us happy all by itself. And happiness doesn't happen by accident. Happiness happens when we know how to make happiness. Happiness has to come from within ourselves. We have to understand the parts of our lives that are under our own control, under our own power, that are in our power to change. And we have to recognize all the stuff going on around us that is completely not in our power to change. And we have to accept the fact that it's going to change slowly at its own pace, because everybody wants the change to come. And that hasn't happened yet. It takes a long time for people to want to have change. So in the meantime, what do we do? See, that was my quandary back in the 1970s when it was obvious, after Richard Nixon was reelected a second time, that the counterculture movement was certainly not going to become the mainstream movement of society at that time. And so what were we to do if we weren't going to be able to reshape society into one where we could really automatically enjoy our lives, because our lives, the whole lifestyle was designed for happiness. That wasn't going to happen. So what do we do? How do we become happy? And a lot of people tried to become happy with disco culture, you know, going out and dancing, looking sexy, and finding someone else who looked sexy and having sex with them. And that went on for a few years. And that was the beginning of the STD epidemic that we have today. And it didn't necessarily make people happy, but it was the way they thought they could be happy. And this is really, as I see it, the main problem, is that because being happy has not been the priority in our society for centuries, we don't have the knowledge of how to be happy. what has been the priority in our society has been work and money. And happiness would come on the edges of that. If you got work, if you got money, then hopefully happiness would come around that somehow. But if not, then you would just endure your unhappy life until you died. And then you were promised that after that, you would be completely happy forever, if you'd been good. And of course, that was a phony promise. When we die, nothing happens to us at all, for no time at all. And the only thing that could possibly happen to us again would be if we wake up and find ourselves being another conscious organism as we are now. We wouldn't be likely to be a human being. We wouldn't be likely to be conscious again on this planet, maybe not even in this universe. The universe might have had to collapse and expand a few times, but at some point, we might find ourselves being another organism, another conscious organism, and we would have no memory of our previous human life, and there would have been no time at all between the end of our human life and the beginning of our next life, whatever that might happen to be. And I'm not talking about the migration of consciousness from one body to another, because consciousness cannot travel in space as an, disembodied envelope of awareness. Consciousness requires a brain to create it. So it would have to be just a totally natural process that at some point we might find ourselves inside of a conscious organism, just the way that we do right now. But that's just a thought. And no time would have passed in between, because without consciousness, there is no time. So one consciousness would just merge into the next one, except the next consciousness would have no memory of the previous one. But no time would have passed in between. But that's just, speculation. What I was saying was that our society has not been organized for us to really be happy in our own lives while we're living our own lives. Now, the counterculture performed the service of redirecting society to some extent, so that now, ever since the psychedelic counterculture, let's say 1970, indeed, we believe that the purpose of life is for us to be happy while we're alive. Most of us actually believe that that is what we should be trying to do, but we don't have a lot of extra time to do it in, and we don't know what to do with our extra time in order to make ourselves happy. And so that's where pleasure science comes in, the science of learning to live pleasurably and happily. And this is requiring self-transformation, self-enhancement, pleasure-generating self-enhancement, happiness-generating self-enhancement. And this is something that is, to a much greater extent, within our own power to change than all of the political events of the world, the global catastrophes, and all the other shit that's going on that we have no control over. But we have some control over our own body, our own lives, and our own free time, as much free time as we happen to have. But then what we need to know, as I said, happiness doesn't happen by accident. Happiness happens when we know how to turn ourselves into a person who feels good every day, basically good emotionally and physically. And that's what I managed to learn. Now, it didn't happen totally by accident, but there was a lot of good luck involved in my case, that I happened to be in a position where I started to learn physical relaxation, loosening up exercises, and I also had been prepared for this piece of good luck by some psychological studying that I had done previously, not in a psychology class, but on my own, from a psychologist who I have never heard mentioned in any of the psychology classes that I've taken. And I've taken a lot of psychology classes in a lot of different schools, and I have 2 degrees in psychology, and never once in psychology class have I heard the name of Wilhelm Reich ever mentioned. Now, I think nowadays that may be changing. In some schools, you will hear Reich's name, but I certainly never did. Not even when I went to a humanistic psychology program. I would have thought that they would have talked about Reich, but no. Reich has been ignored by academic mainstream psychology, and yet he was one of the most important psychological theorists that we've had. He ranks right up there with Freud in importance, at least as important as Freud, more important in my book. And yet very few people have heard of him, except during the counterculture, there was an interest in Reich, and I had read about him in a magazine article in Playboy. And he'd been mentioned just offhand. In fact, not even his name was mentioned, just the adjective Reichian. The article was quoting a conversation between two, counterculture radicals of the time. And one of them said, what did you think of Herbert Marcuse's book, Eros and Civilization? And that was a pretty popular book at the time because it was about sex and civilization. It was criticizing Sigmund Freud's view that civilization necessarily requires us to renounce sexual happiness. And Herbert Marcuse didn't want to accept that. He said, no, civilization requires a certain amount of renunciation, a certain amount of self-repression. But the more that we get machines to do the work for us and AI and so forth to do the work for us, the less time that we really need to work in order to get our needs met. And so what we should do is eliminate what Marcuse called surplus repression. Marcuse, M-A-R-C-U-S-E, he was a Marxist, but a neo-Marxist. And so he was saying Freud insisted that there was no way we could have civilization without repressing our sex drive. And I think what we need to do is remove any excess repression so that we have as much free time, as much liberated time as possible. And we should even try to make work as pleasurable as possible. That's what Marcuse's idea was. Let's make work fun, if possible. Let's find any way we can to make work enjoyable rather than drudgery, which I think is a great idea. But anyway, back to this Playboy article that I was reading. These two student radicals or hippies were talking to each other, and the one says, what did you think of Herbert Marcuse's Eros and Civilization? Eros meaning sexuality and civilization. And the other one said, well, I read it, but I thought it was a little bit too Reichian. R-E-I-C-H-I-A-N, Reichian. And I had really liked Eros and Civilization. And so I thought if it was too Reichian, well, then I should probably find out sometime what Reich was all about. And so maybe half a year later, I was in the student bookstore at the university I was attending, and there was a book called The Selected Writings of Wilhelm Reich. And so I bought that book, and it changed my life. And it gave me a psychological theory to work with, so that when I then began to encounter pleasure science exercises, muscle relaxing exercises, and emotional release work, I knew, because I'd been doing this reading with Reich, that it was very, very healthy for me to release my emotions as completely as possible. And that was a very important part of the early pleasure science work that I did that made possible the subsequent relaxation, the subsequent deep relaxation that I was able to do, and that allowed me to eventually learn how to do super euphoric sex with thunderous, earth-shattering cosmic orgasms that I've been talking about in the last two talks. So I got this book by Wilhelm Reich, and it turns out he was Austrian. You might think from his name he was German, but no, he was Austrian. And you might think from his name, Reich, like the Third Reich, you might think he was a Nazi, but no, he was a Jew. And he was not only a Jew, he was also very sympathetic to socialism because he cared a lot about the poverty that he saw around him in Austria and in Germany particularly. He moved from Austria to Berlin and saw the poverty there. And he was very involved in the communist movement there. And it almost came to warfare between the Nazis and the communists in Berlin when Hitler took over. And as soon as Hitler was definitely in power, Wilhelm Reich knew that as a Jew and as a basically democratic communist or socialist, that he would be sent to the concentration camps, or it wasn't healthy for him to stay there. He'd be executed or something. So he left and went to Scandinavia and lived there until the outbreak of World War II. And at that point, he was lucky enough to be able to come to New York and get a job teaching at the New School for Science, a New School for Social Research, I think, in New York, a very radical school, experimental school at that time. And he continued to practice psychotherapy and ended up having a place in Maine, sort of a retreat center in Maine where he could do some psychotherapeutic work there. And so his teachings became known in English and in America because Reich had moved here. And so in 1971, about 30 years after Reich had come to the United States, here I'm reading his book, and he'd already been dead by more than 10 years at that point. So what was it about Wilhelm Reich's psychology that makes me think it's so important to happiness, to the project of becoming happy? Reich was the first person to notice something with his psychoanalytic clients. He was a Freudian psychoanalyst, and Freudian psychoanalysis was talk therapy. You're supposed to go in there, lie down on the couch, and start saying whatever comes to mind, to start talking about your dreams, and eventually this will allow the therapist to figure out what's going on unconsciously with you, what unconscious feelings and emotions and wishes you might have. And then when the therapist points these out to you, points out these unconscious wishes, you recognize, oh yes, and many of them involved like family member sexual attraction. I was attracted to my father, I was attracted to my mother, I was attracted to my sister, I was attracted to an older family of the friend. All of these sexual feelings and wishes that were socially taboo, very taboo. And so people could not let themselves feel those sexual desires without feeling a lot of anxiety about it, because they knew how much society would condemn them if society knew their secret wishes and desires. And so they had to keep them bottled up inside. And those desires made them so anxious every time they came into consciousness that they didn't like being anxious. The emotional brain hates being anxious. So the emotional brain, as soon as an anxiety-provoking sexual wish comes into consciousness, the emotional brain just shuts it down, doesn't even allow it to remain in consciousness. And that is the mechanism known as repression, pushing an idea out of consciousness. Yeah, the German word actually means pushing out, pushing the idea out of consciousness. That's repression of a forbidden sexual wish or any other kind of forbidden wish. You want to kill your father. Maybe you want to have sex with your mother and you want to kill your father. That's Freud's classic Oedipus complex. Well, if you imagine that you want to kill your father, that makes you feel so anxious and so guilty for even thinking that you must push that idea out of consciousness. And if you feel sexual attraction towards your mother, then you must push that out of consciousness, because if anybody knew about that, they would think you were really sick, And one of the things that Freud's theory actually showed was that human sexuality is polymorphously perverse. And I really like that phrase, polymorphously perverse, because perverse doesn't mean sick. Perverse does not mean, psychologically sick. What it means is that the sexual drive, instead of just going to male-female intercourse, has branched out and has learned to find other activities erotically arousing, other than just straight-on male-female sex. And that would include family member attractions and sexual things. A lot of things that society has traditionally forbidden are extremely natural to the human sex drive, because the human sex drive will learn to find anything sexy in the environment that it actually experiences. And if we have very restricted sexual experiences, particularly personal sexual experiences, and maybe the sexiest things that we are exposed to are other members of our family, because within the family, people go around half-dressed and undressed and casually dressed, and they're always there and close to you, and you can imagine that you might be having sexual interactions with them, and they may be very attractive. And it depends on who is attractive in your family to you or who isn't, as to whether your emotional brain will find them sexy. But it's extremely natural to find family members of one sort or another sexy. They will match the particular gender that your own emotional brain gets turned on by. It is usually the other gender than your own, but sometimes it's the same gender as your own, or sometimes both. So, and the family member may be older, or the same age, it may be the older generation, the parental generation, or maybe one of your siblings, brothers or sisters. But anyway, here's a psychoanalytic patient. Here's a patient who feels some kind of socially taboo sexual feeling, maybe for the same sex, someone of the same sex, and they can't tell anybody, but they worry about it all the time, and it's a big secret they keep inside themselves, and it makes them really anxious because they're worried someone might guess what they're feeling, read their mind somehow, or find out what they're thinking and feeling, and so we have to hide that from other people, and we put on a phony personality, like we're the purest person sexually ever. We've never had a sexy thought of any sort about anybody, and we're just as pure as the driven snow. That's the appearance we give on the outside, whereas inside we are repressing all of these forbidden sexual wishes and desires, or at least one particular one. It's all it takes is to have one. For me, it was not only being sexually attracted to my mother, which oddly enough I didn't feel that much shame about, because I didn't really know how badly it was a taboo when I was feeling it, and when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, let's say. But for me, the big stressor was just masturbating, period. Because my father, the preacher, had dumped his masturbation shame on me with a little pamphlet, a terrible little pamphlet that he gave me that just ruined my sexual enjoyment of masturbation in a lot of ways. I didn't stop masturbating, but I didn't ever enjoy it with the same kind of innocence and pleasure that I did originally before he gave me that pamphlet and spoiled it all for me with his Christian anti-sexual dogma. So that was my stressor. That was my internal stressor. And I had to always act outwardly like I wasn't interested in sex at all, and all that stuff. Just put on a total false front. So in psychoanalysis, a person who is suffering from states of stress that are causing weird symptoms in their body, they have headaches, they may have backaches, they may have an upset stomach all the time, an ulcer, or a racing heart, panic attacks, or Or they may be totally shut down emotionally, feel nothing at all, and say, why can't I feel any pleasure at all? Because they've shut down their entire emotional brain along with repressing all of these unacceptable desires. So the person that's in this state of chronic tension comes into the psychoanalyst and lies down and eventually gets around to talking about something, and the patient and the analyst finally talk about the forbidden wish. It's allowed to come out into consciousness, and they talk about it, and the psychoanalyst doesn't get freaked out about it. The psychoanalyst doesn't condemn the person for it. The psychoanalyst says, oh, that's okay. So these feelings are natural. Don't worry about it. Allow that feeling into consciousness, make friends with it, be aware of it, and then know that you're not in any danger of actually acting on it or doing anything about it. And know that it doesn't make you sick. It doesn't make you psychologically sick to have that kind of feeling, because human beings have polymorphously perverse feelings, polymorphously diverse feelings for lots of people, and lots of different kinds of activities. And we cannot say that, these sexual feelings are good and these are not good. The only ones that are not good are ones that involve fantasizing about causing pain to others, sadistic fantasies and so forth. Those are probably an indication that we have a lot of suppressed anger that needs to be dealt with, because sex should not be used for anger or domination. Sex should be about affection. Sex should be about sharing pleasure, doing it in a friendly and loving manner with whoever it is that we happen to be attracted to. So anyway, in psychoanalysis, the idea of the cure was that you tell the analyst and discuss with the analyst all of these, whatever suppressed unconscious desires or angers or fears that you have, you talk about them, you get them out in the open, and you normalize them. Basically, you accept them as a normal part of being human, so you don't have to think of yourself as being weird anymore. The analyst says, no, everybody's weird in that way. Everybody's sexually weird in some way. That's just how life is and how the human sex drive is, and it's not any problem as long as nobody's hurting anybody else. And certainly whatever we do in our fantasies is not hurting anyone else. So that was the talking cure, that the client, the patient, would talk about these unexpressed feelings and desires and wishes, and that then their symptoms would go away, because that would relieve the stress in their emotional brain. And it was their emotional brain being stressed out that gave them all these so-called neurotic symptoms: the headache, the backache, the upset stomach, the racing heart, certain pains here and there, all kinds of different things, because the emotional brain, when it gets stressed out, has to put that stress energy somewhere. And oftentimes it goes into the body, one part of the body or another, and creates painful or unpleasant problems with the body that are not caused by anything being physically wrong with the body at all. They are caused by the fact that the emotional brain controls muscles that run to, or nerves that run to all the muscles, and the emotional brain also controls what's known as the autonomic nervous system, which creates our heart rate and our digestion and our breathing and all kinds of things. So that this stress energy from the emotional brain is what's causing these neurotic symptoms. Others can be obsessive thinking, obsessive compulsive activity. That nervous energy has to go somewhere, and it goes into this repetitive activity that people have to do. They're compelled to do that. That's why they call it obsessive compulsive. They are compelled to let out that energy in these activities that don't need to be done. But they feel better when they do them, that releases some of their anxiety, but it doesn't actually get rid of the underlying cause of the anxiety. Now, sometimes confessing a deep, dark secret will indeed bring about relaxation and relieve a lot of stress for a while. And the neurotic symptoms, or whatever they may be, or just the feeling of uneasiness inside will vanish for a while, because it feels so good to have gotten that off our chest and shared it with someone. So there's definitely a benefit in having any kind of counseling where you are able to frankly share with someone else some deep, dark secret that you're keeping hidden inside yourself. And that can relieve a lot of stress, and it can help you feel better for a while. But Wilhelm Reich was finding that he could get his patients to talk about any of their most unconscious feelings and emotions and so forth, and it wasn't basically changing them. They weren't actually getting happier, and they kept on feeling just the way they felt before, that just talking wasn't enough here. And he began to look at them and see that the problem wasn't with one specific neurotic symptom or another, that you just had to get rid of the headaches or the backaches. The problem was with the person's whole character, the person's personality, the attitude, the emotional attitude that the person confronted life with. And that attitude had become a kind of rigidity, a permanent habit of tension of one sort or another in that person. And it involved their facial expression, which was expressing the kind of emotions they were stuck in with the attitude. And then it was also being expressed throughout their whole body with characteristic tensions that they were holding in their muscles throughout their body, as well as abnormal activity in their autonomic nervous system. Some people are hysterical. Hysterical is used in a technical term here. It means they have a whole lot of energy going on all the time. They may be always talking, and their skin is quite red and flushed, and they're never still, and they seem like they've got all this emotion that's just barely being held in, and they could almost explode with it. They may be very jolly and laughing all the time, but nevertheless, their emotional brain is generating all this energy that they're just barely able to contain. And they love to be sociable and talk with other people, because that's one of the ways they can get out this excess energy. And it doesn't matter what they talk about, but as long as they're able to keep on talking, they're able to get rid of some of that energy. So that's one kind of personality. And sort of the opposite kind of personality is the totally controlled person who doesn't ever do anything sort of spontaneous and doesn't show much emotion at all. The person who has shut down their emotional brain so much that their body seems to be maybe without much energy at all, or everything's very focused and very controlled. These folks are very controlled. And then there are people in all stages in the middle. One of the things is macho guys, who are intent on showing that they're not afraid of anybody else, and I'm a tough guy, I can endure anything, and I take pride in my toughness. And that's a very common thing among men, is to feel self-esteem for being tough. But then they can't be tender. They don't know how to relax and be affectionate with someone. They're too intent on proving that they're masculine and that they're normal and that they're healthy. And I think a lot of this comes from sexual shame that people are taught, that we are all taught as youngsters. We're taught to always keep our bodies covered and keep our sex organs covered up, and men are taught to hide their penis and never show their penis and never talk about their penis, and pretend they don't have a penis. Basically, men are taught to pretend they don't have a penis, and there's a lot of penis shame that then affects our whole personality. And men are very concerned with maintaining a certain outward appearance of only joking about sex, only being rough about sex, only talking about sex like bragging about sex, or not talking about it in a natural way. What we're lacking is a natural feeling about sex, and that's why I was suggesting last time that it's so good and helpful to go to the nude beach and overcome our embarrassment about our body and about having sex organs, and being proud to show off our body and our sex organs to other people who are also naked and unashamed. The joy of sexual innocence is wonderful, and I think every place that doesn't have a nude beach should have a garden. It should really be a psychedelic garden with a nude beach in it, where people could go take psychedelics if they want to, in a safe environment where they could always get help if they started panicking for any reason. They would know that there was always somebody there to help bring them down and take care of them, and just knowing that would help people not freak out when they're on acid or mushrooms or something like that. But also have a nice nude beach there, a lake, with a little beach in an area where people could be naked and could enjoy being naked and sexual in an innocent way, where being naked and even being sexually aroused did not immediately lead to any kind of unwanted sexual interaction with someone. I think that one thing that should be allowed at a nude beach is for guys to get erections, and to be proud about getting their erections, and be proud about showing them to any women who actually were interested in them, particularly the women who had caused those erections to appear, and that there could be a very nice erotic visual interaction between people, and they could even be talking, but they wouldn't actually engage in sexual activity, because that way they could stay relaxed and be turned on, and the women could enjoy seeing the men's erections, and the men could enjoy showing their erections to the women in a very natural way. And then, people who are into the same sex could be flirting visually with people of their own gender, wherever they wanted to be doing that. That sexual arousal, in other words, should not be forbidden at the nude beach. Sexual arousal should not lead to anything beyond that, other than talking and conversation. Of course, if people want to hook up later, that's their prerogative after they leave the garden. But while they're there, everybody should feel completely comfortable and relaxed at allowing themselves to be sexually aroused and to be sexually provocative, for the women to be sexually provocative without feeling that anything bad is going to happen to them, even if there are guys who get hard-ons while looking at these women being sexually provocative. Nevertheless, everybody can just enjoy the erotic energy that flows back and forth between people. And this would be one way for men particularly to overcome their penis shame and convert it into penis pride. Being able to be proud of our erections is something that is natural for males. It goes back to the chimpanzees, our closest primate cousins. When a male chimpanzee wants to let a female chimpanzee know that he would like to have sex with her, he will stand up and show her his erection. And if she's interested, she'll give him the kind of a glance that lets him to know that he can come on over and have fun with her. It only takes about 30 seconds for chimps. So then, they can move on and not have to spend the whole rest of their day at it. But and if the male chimpanzee stands up and is showing her his erection, and she's busy eating something and isn't noticing him, he will reach up high and grab an overhead branch to hang from, and he will hang from that branch and bounce up and down, hanging from the branch in order to attract her attention. And of course, as he's bouncing up and down, of course, his penis is bouncing up and down too. So that usually does get her attention, and he finds out whether she's interested or not. So penis pride is something that is natural to male primates, and we human beings, we human males, should not be deprived of our right to feel proud about our penis and about our erections. And we should have some place where we can show that pride in our penises and in our erections without being punished for it, without being sent to jail for it, without being arrested for it, but rather to have it appreciated by an appreciative audience of whoever it is that has managed to get us to have that spontaneous sexual arousal. I think that would be a very positive and sexually therapeutic thing for us to become more emotionally healthy, not just in a sexual way, but for our whole character. Because once you can be proud of being out in the open with your erect penis, then, you would feel, okay, there's not much else about myself I have to hide. I can be more transparent with other people. I can be more open with them. I can be proud of being a sexual person. I don't have to force my sexuality on the attentions of anyone who doesn't want it. I am perfectly content to have sexual interactions only with people who want to have sexual interactions with me. And that's operating, instead of operating from deprivation motivation, where we're grasping at every possible sexual opportunity, and we don't have as much sexual erotic interaction as we would like to have, and therefore we're sort of desperate and we feel deprived and we want to have more sexual activity, and so therefore sometimes we force our sexual attentions on someone who is not interested and doesn't want us to do that and is made uncomfortable by it. That's deprivation motivation, and we don't want that. And that's why it's good to learn how to have transcendental social sex, transcendental solo sex, transcendental masturbation, where we can learn sexual autonomy, meaning we don't have to depend on anyone else to satisfy our sex drive. We know how to give ourselves a wonderful time, solo sex with cosmic orgasms, and be totally satisfied, remembering maybe the good time that we had there at the nude beach in the psychedelic garden, and particularly to have such a good time when we were on psychedelics would help us relearn our sexual response pattern so that we would feel it natural to be sexually aroused and feeling innocent while we were sexually aroused. But to get back to Wilhelm Reich, and then I'm going to finish up, I don't want to go too long today. Wilhelm Reich recognized that people's character was a problem, that they really needed to let go of some of these feelings. He realized these were repressed emotional feelings that needed to be expressed and gotten out. And he realized also that these repressed feelings were creating muscle tensions throughout the body that were interfering with people's ability to enjoy their orgasms. That when they triggered the orgasm reflex, instead of being able to surrender the reflex and letting their body move in its natural motions, instead they were holding their bodies tight because they had this chronic, ongoing, unconscious tension throughout their entire organism coming from their emotional brain. And so Wilhelm Reich's idea was, what has to happen is people need to let those emotions out. Instead of keeping them all bottled up inside themselves, let them out in a therapeutic setting where they're not going to hurt anybody else, but they're going to be able to express those feelings without any inhibitions at all, so they can unlearn the emotional inhibitions that are keeping them so tense and rigid. that it takes more than talking about unexpressed feelings to get rid of that tension. You have to go ahead and express the feelings in some physical and vocal way and get those feelings out of yourself. It's like those repressed emotions are polluting our emotional brain and our character. If we have unexpressed anger, we may be looking for an occasion to express anger legitimately in some social situation. And so when we find somebody else doing something wrong, we're delighted to catch them doing something wrong so that we can scold them and get angry at them. And that releases some of our unexpressed anger. But then when we do that, with our family and other people, and at work, we become a very unpleasant person to be around. And people don't like to be around us because we've got all this anger that's coming out this way or that way or whatever, and it can come out in really subtle ways. You can be passive aggressive, you can do all kinds of things, but really enjoy, hurting other people with whatever you're doing. This is pollution of our character. Our natural character shouldn't be like that. Our natural character should be wanting to just get along with other people in a nice way, in a comfortable way, in a relaxed way, and not being judgmental of other people, and not having any suppressed anger, and not being afraid of other people, being relaxed with them, and not being depressed because we've let out our sadness. See, anger, fear, and sadness are the three emotions that we generally tend to hold inside that give us all this tension in our emotional brain and throughout our body. Anger, fear, and sadness. And we need to learn how to express those feelings and get that pollution out of ourselves. It's what I call emotional cleansing. And the Greeks had a word for it. They called it catharsis, which means purification. And that's why they would put on tragedies every year in Athens. And the tragedy was intended to be a play that would make the audience actually cry. That was the whole point, that it would be so sad that everybody in the audience would cry. And the playwright, whose play made everybody cry the hardest, would win the prize that year, because this was sort of mass psychotherapy. People had a lot to cry about in those days because life was really terrible and hard. And so crying and letting out sadness is one of the most enjoyable experiences we can have. It is an orgasm of its own sort when we just break down and sob. That is an orgasm of sorrow. And if you don't fight it, and if you don't get freaked out by it, if you just observe yourself letting the waves of sadness flow through you, it's actually an orgasmic experience. It's a pleasurable experience, and particularly once you're done, once you go as deep as you can into the sadness and into the pain, you dive into it. You don't run away from it. You say, let me go into that as deep as I can and cry as hard as I can. And the harder you cry, the better it feels. And when you are totally cried out, you feel like you've taken an emotional bath or an emotional hot shower and washed out all the pollution of the sadness that you hadn't been expressing all this time. You feel cleansed. You feel purified. And that is a wonderful feeling, and you feel relaxed. When we have had a good, emotional release session, we feel wonderfully relaxed afterwards. When you can get rid of anger, you feel so happy afterwards. If you've gotten a chance to feel as angry as you can possibly feel and express that and not have people punish you for it, but have people approve of you doing it. I once worked at a halfway house for teenage boys who were offenders of one sort or another, and they were all kept in this little house, and they all were seething with anger all the time. And so they would always be doing mean things to each other because they were full of anger. And the whole way that the program was structured was to punish them every time they showed any anger or did anything wrong, which just made them angrier. So the whole program was making the situation worse. But I had a couple of batakas. Now, a bataka is like a sword. It's got a hand guard on it. It's got a stick. And on the stick is a big sausage-shaped, hot dog-shaped piece of foam enclosed in soft velour cloth. And I had two of these foam swords. And what you can do is you can clobber each other with batakas. It's B-A-T-A-K-A-S, batakas. You can look them up on the internet. You can clobber somebody as hard as you want with one of those things, and it'll just bounce off them, and they will just laugh. And they will clobber you back, and it'll just bounce off you, and you'll just laugh. And you can get as angry as you want and hit as hard as you want, and you're not going to hurt anybody, and nobody's going to get angry at you for doing it, and the other person isn't going to be resentful because they can hit you back. You can both clobber each other until you're exhausted. And so that's what I did with these kids. We took turns. First, I was battering one of them, and they were battering me back. And there was this one guy, and he was huge. He was much bigger than me. And I would hit him as hard as I could, and he'd hit me back, but he had this terrified look on his face at first, like, I'm going to get in so much trouble for doing this. I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm doing this because I'm going to get in so much trouble. But after a while he loosened up, we just kept battering away, and finally he just got into it, and we had a great time. And then there was this little guy who was the angriest person there. Little people are often really angry because it's so scary to be so small that you have to be really fierce to protect yourself, and you're really angry about that all the time. So this little guy was just full of fury, but he could fight the biggest guy there and hit him back and forth as hard as they wanted. He could fight me, the authority figure, and I wouldn't care how hard he hit me because I just hit him back, and we wouldn't hurt each other. And we just did this for about a half an hour or more with about a half a dozen different guys. And at the end of the time, we'd all had a chance to get all our anger out. And we left the house and went across the street to the park. And just everybody had such a good time. I just watched them all. They all just kind of played with each other. They had a great time. They weren't angry at each other anymore. They were laughing. They were just having the best time they could possibly have. And they had gotten that anger pollution out of them for the time being. And that'll last for a while, but eventually it might come back. And the reason that it comes back is that we haven't actually learned how to operate our emotional brain in a different way that won't generate all this tension. We have to follow up emotional catharsis with complete relaxation of our body and our emotions and our breathing and our mind. And once we can do that, once we follow up the emotional catharsis with practicing relaxation so that we learn what it's like to be relaxed all the time, then we can start going out and being with other people and being relaxed all the time. And we don't have all this anger or fear or sadness, so that we can be totally natural with them. But that takes relaxation practice. So you've got catharsis and you've got relaxation practice, body-mind relaxation practice. And both of these go together to make up a total effective pleasure science. You can't have, I don't think, an effective emotional therapy, emotional pleasure science, without having those two elements, both catharsis and relaxation. And that's why I say that to do this successfully, we have to be happiness radicals. We have to be willing to do whatever it takes to actually be happy and to change how we're feeling inside. So I'll talk more about that later, but thank you very much for watching today. And don't forget, if you would like a summary, a printed out summary of today's talk, you can look at the video description box underneath the YouTube video, click on the link there, and it'll print out nice, neat, artificial intelligence generated summary of everything that I've said in the program. So you can go ahead and do that, and all you have to do is go to this, click the link, it'll take you to Google Documents, and then do File, Print. Okay, thanks very much. See you next time.